Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to take that relentless fire hose of global information and really boil it down to the essential knowledge you need.
Especially when you're looking at a global power like India.
Mm.
It's just, the news cycle is incredibly dense, isn't it?
It really is. It's this complex mix of diplomacy, high stakes defense moves, really intricate domestic policy, and, well, this almost aggressive push for technological self reliance.
Exactly. And that's why we do this. The sheer volume of activity just out of New Delhi right now. I mean, everything from, say, strategic mineral talks with Beijing all the way to managing a toxic drug recall domestically.
Yeah, it demands we treat the source material not just as headlines, but more like critical bulletins, each one telling a piece of the story about where the country's headed.
Precisely. And that's our mission today. We've processed a stack of, 13 critical headlines, all from around October 9th, 2025.
That's right. And we're treating each one like a mini bulletin. We're going to extract every important fact, every policy detail, every bit of strategic insight we can find. The goal is a really comprehensive picture of a nation facing, well, immense global pressure.
And what these facts clearly show, when you lay them out, is a nation really operating at an advanced level of strategic balancing. You see India aggressively prioritizing its own national interests.
Right, securing affordable and...
Securing energy, absolutely. Promoting defense self-reliance, driving that indigenous tech piece we mentioned.
But at the same time, they're managing these incredibly delicate relationships.
Extremely delicate, especially
Yeah.
with the U.S., with China, and even, non-state actors like the Taliban. It's a fascinating case study, really, in maximizing strategic autonomy while navigating all this global volatility.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start, I think, with that political flashpoint happening over in Washington, D.C., the situation regarding the currently strained India-U.S. relationship, specifically this new push to repair things.
Right, a very necessary starting point.
So first up, we've got what sounds like a pretty loud diplomatic alarm bell ringing in D.C. On October 6th, just a few days ago, a really significant letter lands on President Trump's desk, urging him, quite forcefully it seems, to urgently repair relations with India. And this wasn't some minor thing, was it?
No, not at all. We're talking 19 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. 19 of them put their names on this warning.
That's substantial.
And the bipartisan nature of it is, I think, what really gives it weight. Yeah, Democrats and Republicans signing on, that signals pretty clearly that the relationship with India isn't just, a partisan issue.
Right, it's seen as fundamental.
It's a fundamental strategic concern shared across the aisle. And these lawmakers were expressing, quite explicitly, alarm over recent remarks from President Trump. Remarks they felt were, well, dismissive of India's global standing.
And they didn't mince words about the risk, did they? They warned very clearly this kind of rhetoric could potentially jeopardize decades of hard-won diplomatic progress.
Decades. That's a strong warning.
And the source material highlights some prominent Indian-American lawmakers involved: Ro Khanna, Raja Krishnamurthy, Ami Bera. Their involvement adds another layer, doesn't it? Reflecting concerns maybe across policy circles, but also within the community itself.
Absolutely. It signals deep concern that the administration might be, perhaps inadvertently, undoing some core strategic groundwork built up over many years.
So what was the core strategic justification they laid out in the letter? What was the main argument?
Well, the core message they really hammered home was that India isn't just the world's largest democracy, which is important, of course, but crucially, it's a vital counterbalance to authoritarian regimes in Asia.
Okay, the counterbalance argument.
Exactly. And they stressed that this reality, this strategic alignment, it necessitates robust, predictable cooperation. Across the board, defense, trade, upholding democratic values. The implicit warning was clear. Undermining this partnership doesn't just hurt India. It has massive long-term consequences for U.S. strategic interests, especially in the Indo-Pacific.
Particularly when it comes to China.
Precisely. Especially in that critical effort to counter China's growing influence. That's the subtext, or maybe even the text running through the whole letter.
It feels less like, standard diplomatic language and more like a direct, almost formal political intervention from Congress. What do you make of the timing? Why issue these specific strategic warnings right now?
I think it's a profound political signal. They're trying to, in a way, depersonalize the relationship, pushing back hard against any rhetoric that seems isolationist by emphasizing a fundamental truth. Long-term global stability, particularly in Asia, really hinges on these kinds of alliances.
So demanding a reaffirmation.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Demanding the administration reaffirm America's commitment, not just with words, but with concrete policy actions that reinforce shared interests, rather than undercutting them with things like unexpected tariffs or, perceived slights. They're really trying to force a course correction here.
Which leads us very neatly into the next piece of news, the personnel changes. #Chab B. Key U.S. diplomatic post confirmed. Headline 4.
Yes, landing just days after that letter. Amidst all this strain, on October 8th, the U.S. Senate finally confirmed two really key diplomatic roles relevant to India.
Okay, who are we talking about?
So the Senate confirmed Sergio Gore as the new U.S. ambassador to India, and Paul Kapoor as the Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia.
Right. And the process itself was interesting, wasn't it?
Very. The detail that stands out is that it was controversial. Approved in a single block vote, pushed through by the Republican-controlled Senate, and the vote was narrow, 51-47.
Wow, that close.
That razor-thin margin really shows how politically divisive these appointments were, even for what are normally considered, necessary diplomatic postings. It wasn't smooth sailing.
Let's look at the individuals. Sergio Gore described as a close political ally of President Trump.
Yes, his background is leading the White House Presidential Personnel Office. So his appointment is widely seen, by analysts anyway, as reinforcing the administration's direct political influence over that diplomatic channel to New Delhi.
Okay, so a political appointee in the ambassador role. What about Kapoor?
Kapoor brings a very different profile. He's seen as the perhaps critical counterbalance. Deep intellectual capital there. Former professor at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School.
Specializing in South Asia.
Exactly. He's authored several books specifically on South Asian geopolitics, India, Pakistan, terrorism, regional conflict. He's got deep expertise.
So the pairing seems quite strategic then. A political loyalist to maybe execute directives alongside a respected regional expert to handle the nuances.
That seems to be the thinking, yes. Someone to carry the administration's message directly, and someone who understands the incredibly complex regional dynamics.
But, and this is the crucial context, these appointments are happening during a period of significant ongoing strain. We have to remind ourselves of the specific friction points.
Absolutely critical context.
There's that hefty 50% tariff on Indian goods still in place. And maybe even more contentious given India's energy needs is that 25% penalty for importing Russian energy.
Exactly. And if you connect this back to that congressional letter, these two new officials are inheriting a profoundly difficult situation. The strain really ramped up early in the year when President Trump criticized India's trade practices. But there's a deeper issue, too.
It is.
India remains deeply wary, fundamentally wary, of what it perceives as this administration's closeness to Pakistan. That's a historical sensitivity that's being aggravated right now.
So here's a question then. Given that deep-seated wariness in New Delhi about the administration's perceived leanings towards Pakistan, isn't sending a political loyalist like Gore, someone so closely tied to Trump, a bit of a calculated risk? Could it potentially erode trust further, even with Kapoor providing that regional expertise?
That's a fantastic question, and yes, it absolutely is a risk. It signals pretty clearly that this White House views the embassy perhaps more as a direct extension of its policy arm, rather than a somewhat more independent diplomatic entity focused on long-term relationship building.
Which could mean
It suggests that immediate policy implementation, maybe pushing harder on those tariffs, enforcing those energy penalties, might take precedence over the slower, more patient work of building trust.
And for India, how do you think they read that?
For India, it likely reinforces their existing strategy. Hedge your bets. Don't rely too heavily on any single partner. Which actually leads us perfectly into how they're defining their autonomy in very practical terms.
Right, let's pivot to that. How India is actively shaping its own path. #3, global alignment and resource autonomy. Headlines 2, 3, 6, 11. ###Choksi, India increases discounted Russian oil imports. Headline 2. Okay, shifting gears now to look at how India is really defining its strategic autonomy in practice. And we start with a, frankly, very bold move in the energy sector.
Extremely bold.
India is dramatically increasing its purchases of discounted Russian oil. This is despite very explicit pressure from the U.S. and other Western allies to, well, cut back on that trade. This is pragmatic policy in action, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the numbers really tell the story of this pivot. Russian oil now accounts for over 40% of India's total crude imports.
40%, that's huge.
It's a massive, unprecedented jump. Before the war in Ukraine, Russia supplied less than 2% of India's oil. So this is a fundamental shift.
And what's driving it? Just the discount.
Primarily economics, yes. The steep discounts Russia is offering make their crude significantly cheaper than alternatives, say, from the Middle East or Africa. For a country with massive energy needs, that price difference is compelling.
And New Delhi's justification is pretty straightforward, right?
Crystal clear, and they've been very consistent. They prioritize their own economic and strategic interests. They talk about affordable energy, national interest, supply security, framing these as non-negotiable necessities for a major developing economy with rapidly rising energy demands.
They present it almost as a duty to their own population.
Essentially, yes. And crucially, from their perspective, they maintain a strong legal position regarding the international sanctions regime.
How?
India consistently states that its trade does not violate international sanctions. The key is that the purchases are strategically structured to happen outside the G7 price cap mechanism.
Right. Explain that mechanism again, briefly.
So the G7 price cap aims to restrict Russian oil sales above a certain dollar threshold if buyers use Western insurance and shipping services. India is circumventing this by using Russian or other non-Western shipping and insurance providers. It's a legal workaround.
And they're also working on the payment side, trying to insulate themselves financially.
Definitely. We're seeing continued diversification of payment mechanisms. They're increasingly using non-dollar currencies, the UAE dirham, sometimes Indian rupees, to settle these oil deals.
Which fits into that broader global trend.
Exactly. It aligns perfectly with the broader push for de-dollarization that several countries are exploring. It builds another layer of autonomy against potential future financial pressure or sanctions from the West.
Now, there's also a complex supply chain effect here, isn't there? It's not just about India consuming the oil.
No, and this is strategically quite clever. A significant amount of that cheap Russian crude is imported into India, processed in their large modern refineries,
Amen.
and then re-exported as refined products. Think high-value diesel, jet fuel, gasoline, often ending up in Europe and other global markets that are officially trying to shun Russian energy.
So India is acting as a kind of intermediary.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
A crucial processing and economic intermediary. It allows them to capture economic value. It helps stabilize global energy markets by keeping supply flowing. And arguably, it somewhat neutralizes the intended impact of Western sanctions, all while serving India's economic interests.
It's complex.
Very complex.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's energy autonomy.
Yeah.
But this focus on strategic independence doesn't mean India is isolating itself, does it?
Not at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. #tag#tag#tag#D, India-Australia defense ties strengthen. Headline 3.
Right, because at the same time, we see India actively deepening defense ties, particularly with Australia, a key partner in the Quad. Exactly. We have Defense Minister Rajnath Singh arriving in Canberra on October 9th. This is a high-level visit specifically aimed at strengthening military and technological cooperation between the two countries.
And he's meeting with his Australian counterpart.
Yes, scheduled meetings with Australian Deputy Prime Minister and Defense Minister Richard Marles. The agenda, according to the source material, is very clear. Focus on joint military exercises, sharing defense technology, and enhancing what they call interoperability between their armed forces.
Okay, let's unpack that term, interoperability. What does that actually mean in practical terms for their militaries?
Good question. Interoperability goes beyond just, having ships sail together during an exercise. It means aligning military standards and procedures. It involves things like setting up secure, real-time communication systems so they can talk to each other effectively in a crisis.
Logistics, too.
Harmonizing logistics, yes. Ensuring that their naval ships, their aircraft, can operate seamlessly alongside each other, maybe even share fuel or spare parts if needed, particularly in the vast Indo-Pacific region.
So this visit is reinforcing existing structures.
Very much so. It reinforces their comprehensive strategic partnership, and it really highlights India's ongoing commitment to the Quad grouping. That's India, the U.S., Japan, and Australia. The Quad is central to the strategy for maintaining a secure and open Indo-Pacific, particularly as a response to China's increasing maritime presence and assertiveness.
And it's not just about exercises, is it? There's talk of technology cooperation, too.
Right. It signals a strong convergence. They're likely exploring opportunities for co-development and even co-production of defense technology. The goal here is for India not just to be a buyer of foreign military equipment, but increasingly a partner in developing and producing it, especially within that Quad framework. Building self-reliance again.
Self-reliance through partnership. Interesting. Okay, so strengthening ties with democratic partners, building defense capability. This brings us inevitably to the big strategic rival, China.
And specifically, the resources that fuel modern technology and defense. #China requests guarantees on rare earth exports, headline 6.
Yes, critical resources. And few places feel that tension more acutely than India right now, judging by this next headline. China has made a specific request regarding India's rare earth minerals.
This is where it gets, as you said earlier, really interesting. China formally requested assurances from India. Assurances that India's exports of heavy rare earth elements, HREEs, will not be redirected to the United States.
Wow, that's quite a direct ask.
A remarkable, quite overt diplomatic maneuver. And it really demonstrates, I think, intense strategic anxiety coming from Beijing.
Why are HREs so important? What are we talking about here?
Right. So these aren't just, common minerals. Heavy rare earths are absolutely essential components in a lot of high-tech and defense applications. We're talking precision-guided munitions, advanced sensor systems like those on the F-35 fighter jet, and crucially, the high-power permanent magnets needed for things like advanced electric vehicle motors and large wind turbines.
And China dominates the market currently.
Completely dominates it. China controls something like over 60%, maybe more now, of the world's processed rare earth supply, especially the heavy ones. And Beijing absolutely views these materials as strategic assets, potential economic weapons even.
And the U.S., meanwhile, is scrambling to find alternatives, right? Trying to break that dependency.
Desperately seeking reliable, non-Chinese sources for these critical inputs. And this situation puts India, which has significant, largely untapped rare earth reserves, squarely in the geopolitical spotlight. India is emerging as a potential key swing producer.
A swing producer. Interesting term. So India holds potential leverage here.
Exactly. And India seems determined to use this moment of geopolitical significance to build its own internal resilience. They recently announced plans to auction off 20 blocks containing rare earth minerals.
To domestic or international companies.
To global miners, actually. The stated goal is to rapidly develop these resources, reduce India's own dependence on China for processed rare earths, and critically, build domestic refining and processing capabilities. This signals India intends to become a much more self-sufficient player in this critical supply chain, not just an exporter of raw materials.
So back to China's request, they're essentially asking India not to help the U.S. diversify its supply chain.
That's the core of it. This request, which came through diplomatic channels, explicitly aims to prevent India from becoming a strategic bypass for the U.S. rare earth supply chain. They want India to keep those HREs out of American hands, directly or indirectly.
And India's response?
Understandably, India has maintained that its mineral trade policies are sovereign decisions. They'll decide who they sell to based on their own interests. But the very fact that Beijing felt the need to make such a direct, almost demanding request, well, it highlights just how intensely geopolitical the rare earths market has become. And it perfectly underscores the strategic autonomy India is trying to carve out across multiple domains.
Fascinating intersection of geology, technology, and geopolitics. Okay, let's shift focus from China to another complex neighbor, Afghanistan. #Taliban flag dilemma ahead of Mutaki's visit. Headline 11. India is facing a rather unique and quite tricky diplomatic quandary. This is ahead of the first ever visit by the Afghan foreign minister under the Taliban regime, Amir Khan Mutaki. And it boils down to a flag.
Believe it or not, yes. The core issue revolves around protocol.
Yeah.
Whether or not to allow the display of the Taliban's official flag, the white banner with specific Islamic inscriptions during Mutaki's official meetings and engagements in India.
And the context here is key, isn't it? India hasn't formally recognized the Taliban government.
Absolutely critical context. India, like most of the world, has not formally recognized the Taliban regime since they took power back in August 2021. So displaying that specific flag during an official visit, well, it could easily be interpreted as a form of tacit political endorsement.
Which would complicate things with allies.
Hugely. Especially with Western partners who also refuse to recognize the regime. It would send a very ambiguous signal.
So what are they considering? How do you handle something like this?
Protocol teams are reportedly scrambling, exploring alternatives, maybe using a neutral emblem that represents Afghanistan generally, perhaps using the older Afghan national flag from the pre-Taliban Republican era, or potentially just avoiding flag displays altogether during the official talks to sidestep the political messaging entirely.
A diplomatic tightrope walk.
Very much so.
Eh.
And it's important to note the purpose of Mutaki's visit. It's focused entirely on practical, pressing needs.
Yeah.
Economic cooperation, trying to ensure humanitarian assistance actually reaches the Afghan people, and coordinating on regional security issues.
Especially concerning border stability.
Yes, particularly managing the long shared border and concerns about potential instability spilling over. So India needs to maintain engagement, maintain some level of influence in what is a strategically vital and highly volatile neighboring country.
Without legitimizing the regime politically.
Exactly. So this decision on flag protocol, while it might seem like a minor detail, actually carries significant symbolic weight. It sets a crucial precedent for how India and potentially other countries might engage with unrecognized governments or entities in the future. It's a classic case where diplomatic symbolism becomes intensely political.
Right. It's like you need the conversation for practical reasons, but you absolutely have to manage the optics so you don't alienate your core partners or grant legitimacy you don't intend to.
Precisely. A very fine line to walk.
Okay, let's move from these complex international dealings inward to look at domestic governance, regulation, and some industry news within India itself, starting with, well, a national obsession.
Yes. Cricket. Hashtag tag 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 FOV. Domestic governance, regulation, and industry. Headlines 58913. Headlines 58913. Hashtag tag tag G. Delhi High Court dismisses Team India plea. Headline 5.
Indeed. The Delhi High Court has thrown out a petition that was challenging the right of the Board of Control for Cricket in India, the BCCI, to use the name Team India.
Yes. This was what's known as a public interest litigation, or PIL, filed by an advocate named Rajiv Dutta. His argument was essentially that because the BCCI is, technically speaking, a private autonomous sports body.
Not a government entity.
Exactly. Not an official arm of the state. Therefore, he argued, it shouldn't use the term Team India, because that name implies official representation of the Republic of India itself.
Interesting argument legally, perhaps. How did the court react?
Well, the court, led by Acting Chief Justice Manmohan and Justice Mini Pushkarna, wasn't just dismissive. The report suggests they were visibly quite annoyed by it.
Really?
Yes. They dismissed the plea very forcefully, calling it a sheer wastage of judicial time, and they specifically characterized the petition itself as frivolous.
Ouch. Strong words from the bench.
Very strong. The ruling essentially reaffirmed the BCCI's long-standing legitimacy as the functional, recognized governing body for cricket in India. The court basically said, look, everyone knows who Team India is. The team's identity is widely accepted and understood globally, regardless of the BCCI's specific private incorporation status.
So the practical reality trumped the technical legal argument.
Precisely. And there's a broader message here, too, beyond just cricket. The court seemed to be reinforcing the idea that the judiciary, which is already burdened with enormous case backlogs in India, simply won't entertain what it sees as baseless or trivial litigation. It strongly upheld the BCCI's undisputed standing as the nation's de facto cricketing authority.
Sheer wastage of judicial time. You can almost picture the judges sighing, dealing with major constitutional issues one minute, and then having to rule on cricket team branding the next.
Quite. A very Indian legal moment, perhaps. Hashtag tag tag Tate HA aviation regulator seeks independent funding. Headline 8.
All right, moving from the cricket pitch to the skies. India's aviation regulator, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, or DGCA, is making a pretty significant push for major institutional reform.
Yes, this is important. They're formally requesting financial autonomy. They want to move away from their current model, which relies on annual budgetary support allocated by the central government.
And
Instead, they want an independent funding model, potentially allowing them to collect fees directly from airlines, airports, maybe other stakeholders in the aviation sector. The goal is full financial independence.
what's the justification? Why do they need this change now?
It seems driven by an urgent need for modernization and critically enhanced safety oversight. The DGCA explicitly argues it needs this autonomy to match global regulatory standards. Think of powerful bodies like the FAA in the US or EASA in Europe.
And the current budget system limits them.
Significantly, yes. Relying on the annual government budget cycle apparently limits the DGCA's flexibility. It makes it harder to quickly hire highly specialized technical experts, difficult to invest rapidly in upgrading crucial surveillance and inspection technology, and potentially slows down the ability to conduct timely, thorough safety audits.
And India's aviation market is growing incredibly fast, isn't it?
It's booming, one of the fastest growing major aviation markets in the world. Passenger traffic is projected to double over the next decade or so. The current regulatory structure, tethered to those bureaucratic budget cycles, simply risks not being able to keep pace with that explosive growth.
So they need to address potential safety gaps.
Absolutely. Address safety gaps, tackle staff shortages, particularly as skilled inspectors and technical staff, and invest in the infrastructure needed to effectively regulate such a massive, fast-expanding sector.
Has this been flagged before?
Yes, significantly. An audit by the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, previously pointed out deficiencies, specifically in areas like personnel training standards and the robustness of technical surveillance capabilities. There were even hints of regulatory capture risks.
So independent funding is seen as the solution.
It's seen as absolutely essential, granting the DGCA this financial autonomy, allowing it to generate its own revenue stream, is viewed as the key step to address these known weaknesses, improve India's global aviation safety rating, and build the kind of robust regulatory credibility that's vital for safe, sustainable long-term growth in the sector.
Makes sense. You need a regulator that can scale with the industry it oversees. Okay, next headline is, this one's genuinely alarming, concerning public safety.
Yes, this is deeply concerning, and unfortunately it echoes some tragic history. #TAG, toxic cough syrups found. WHO notified. Headline 9.
India has notified the World Health Organization, the WHO, about 3 contaminated cough syrups discovered in the market, and they contain a highly toxic industrial solvent.
That's correct. The notification went out on October 8th. The specific products identified are 3 oral cough syrups, Cold Out, Cough-Set, and Cough-Sil, all manufactured by a company called Norris Medicines, based in the state of Maharashtra.
And the contaminant is?
Diethylene glycol, or DEG. This is a cheap industrial solvent. It's absolutely not meant for human consumption. It's known globally to cause severe health effects, primarily acute kidney failure, and it can be fatal, even if ingested in relatively small amounts.
This sounds horrifyingly familiar. Haven't we seen issues with Indian-made syrups before?
Tragically, yes. This incident immediately brings to mind the devastating 1998 incident in Gujarat, where DEG-contaminated medicine led to the deaths of dozens of children. And more recently, there's been intense global scrutiny following deaths in places like Gambia and Uzbekistan, also linked to contaminated syrups manufactured in India.
What was the regulatory response this time?
The response from India's Central Drugs Standard Control Organization, the CDSCO, appears to have been swift. They ordered an immediate recall of all the affected batches of these 3 syrups, and they suspended production at the Norris Medicines facility pending further investigation.
But what's the root cause here? How does something like DEG end up in cough syrup?
The preliminary findings, though investigations are ongoing, strongly suggest the company may have illegally, or perhaps negligently, substituted the required more expensive pharmaceutical-grade solvents, like propylene glycol or glycerin, with this cheap industrial-grade DEG.
As a cost-cutting measure.
That's the suspicion. A reckless, dangerous cost-cutting measure that results in mass poisoning. This incident, unfortunately, underscores persistent systemic vulnerabilities in parts of India's pharmaceutical supply chain.
So what needs to happen?
It demands systemic reforms. Much stricter regulatory oversight, more frequent and unannounced inspections, and crucially, better, more robust, auditable traceability of all raw materials, tracking them right from the source through to the final product on the pharmacy shelf. Without that, the risk of these kinds of tragedies recurring remains far too high.
A sobering reminder of the importance of regulatory vigilance. Okay, let's move to our final headline in this domestic section, shifting to industry and technology.
Yes, a more positive story here, focusing on indigenous innovation. #JZO founder praises indigenous innovation. Headline 13.
This was triggered by a high-profile decision by India's Union Home Minister, Amit Shah. He decided to switch his official government communication channel to use Zoho Mail.
Right. And this move prompted a public response from Zoho's CEO, Sridhar Vembu. Vembu is a prominent figure in Indian tech. He publicly praised the Indian engineers, particularly those at Zoho, who chose to, in his words, stay back and build world-class technology products domestically, rather than seeking opportunities abroad.
So celebrating homegrown talent.
Exactly. He specifically celebrated the fact that Zoho Mail's success wasn't just built in the major tech hubs like Bangalore or Hyderabad, but by teams working across India, often in smaller towns, even rural areas. It emphasizes this idea of distributed talent and national self-reliance.
And the Home Minister using Zoho Mail, that's seen as a significant endorsement.
Hugely significant, symbolically. It's viewed as a powerful endorsement of the government's Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. It's the Self-Reliant India campaign.
How so?
Well, it aligns perfectly with the national goal of reducing dependency on foreign technology platforms, especially American ones like Gmail or Microsoft Outlook, particularly when it comes to sensitive government communications. Using an Indian-built platform sends a strong message.
And Vembu's company, Zoho, practices the self-reliance in other ways too, right?
Yes. Vembu's philosophy goes beyond just the software itself. It extends to talent development. He highlighted their unique Zoho schools of learning. This is basically an alternative educational model. They take students, often from non-traditional backgrounds, sometimes from poorer rural areas who might not have elite college degrees,
And train them directly.
and train them directly through an intensive practical curriculum into highly skilled, world-class software engineers who then work for Zoho. It's a different model for building talent locally.
So what's the takeaway from this whole episode?
I think this moment signals a growing confidence, including at the highest official levels, in the capability and security of Indian-built technology platforms, especially for handling sensitive data. That provides a massive psychological boost, and potentially an economic one too, to the entire domestic tech ecosystem. It's proof of concept that world-class enterprise technology can indeed be built successfully within India.
Reinforcing that theme of self-reliance again. Okay, let's move into our final section looking at some broader security, environmental, and policy challenges.
Right, starting with a politically charged issue. #tag_V. Security, environment, and policy challenges. Headlines 10, 7, 12. #tag. Modi criticizes Congress on 2611 response. Headline 10.
We have Prime Minister Narendra Modi criticizing the main opposition party, the Congress Party. This came in a high-profile video message released on October 8th.
Yes, and the allegation he made was very specific and very serious. It was delivered, it's important to note, within the context of an ongoing election campaign.
Okay, what was the specific claim?
Modi claimed that the previous Congress-led government had compromised India's counterterrorism efforts in the aftermath of the devastating 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, the 2611 attacks. He alleged they did this by, in his words, bowing to foreign pressure.
Meaning what specifically?
Meaning they refrained from taking decisive, perhaps military action against Pakistan, which is widely believed by India to have harbored and supported the terrorist group responsible for the attacks.
And Modi was using this historical event to draw a contrast.
Absolutely. To draw a direct contrast with his own administration's record on national security. He pointed to things like the cross-border surgical strikes and air raids conducted against alleged terrorist camps in Pakistan under his leadership, presenting them as examples of decisive, proactive action that, he implies, the Congress government failed to take.
So clearly a campaign strategy. Frame his party as tougher, more decisive on national security.
Precisely. It's a well-worn narrative, but often effective politically.
How did the Congress Party respond?
Predictably, Congress leaders swiftly and strongly rejected Modi's claims. They labeled them as a transparently political attempt to exploit a national tragedy for electoral gain.
What was their counter-argument?
They cited the extensive international diplomatic efforts and intelligence sharing they undertook during that period. They argued their response was actually careful, multilateral, and appropriate given the complex international situation at the time. This whole controversy really just reignites that deep ongoing debate in India over how successive governments have handled foreign policy and national security, particularly in the shadow of the 2611 trauma.
And it underscores just how politically potent that event remains, how easily it can be mobilized in political discourse, even years later.
Absolutely. It's an enduring point of political contention. #L invasive species threat exacerbated by lack of data. Headline 7.
Okay, shifting now from political battles to ecological ones. India is apparently facing a growing and quite serious ecological threat from invasive alien species, IAS.
Yes, this is a major environmental challenge globally, but it seems particularly acute in India. And the national response is being fundamentally hampered by a critical data gap.
What kind of threat do these species pose?
The problem is immense, and it's costly. You have non-native plants, animals, even insects that get introduced, establish themselves, and then spread aggressively. They disrupt natural ecosystems, they outcompete native plants and animals, sometimes driving them towards extinction, and they can cause billions of dollars in damage to agriculture and forestry each year.
And the data gap you mentioned, what's missing?
Well, the core institutional failure identified in the source is this. India currently lacks an official, comprehensive, centralized national list of which species are actually considered invasive within the country. There's no single unified database tracking their spread and impact.
Really? No official list?
Apparently not a single authoritative one that guides policy across the board. This lack of basic data severely hinders the ability to develop effective, rapid response policies and coordinated management strategies. You can't manage what you don't systematically measure.
How big is the problem estimated to be?
Well, one global database, the Global Register of Introduced and Invasive Species, GRES, lists about 330 invasive alien species for India. But crucially, local experts quoted in the reports believe the actual number present in the country is likely much higher, and their impacts are far more widespread than currently documented.
Can you give some examples of problematic species mentioned?
Yes, the reports name several notorious invasive plants. Lantana camara, which forms these dense, impenetrable thickets that smother native vegetation. Parthenium hysterophorus, often called Congress grass, which is allergenic, toxic to livestock, and chokes out pasture grasses. And Prosopis juliflora, a thorny shrub that spreads rapidly, especially in arid and semi-arid regions, consuming vast amounts of precious groundwater.
So multiple well-known invasive threats.
Exactly. And what's particularly interesting, or perhaps worrying, is that the problem isn't static. It's being actively exacerbated by broader global trends.
Like climate change.
Like climate change, which can create new opportunities for invasive species to thrive. Also, rapid changes in land use deforestation. Urbanization can disturb ecosystems and make them more vulnerable to invasion. And of course, increased global trade and travel constantly provide new pathways for non-native species to arrive.
So a growing threat driven by multiple factors. But the response is lagging.
That's the key issue. The institutional response in India is described as fragmented. Responsibility is siloed across different government departments: agriculture, forestry, environment, water resources, often at the state level, with no single overarching national strategy for things like early detection, rapid response to new invasions, or long-term ecological restoration of affected areas.
And this fragmentation has consequences.
Significant ones. It puts India's ability to meet its international biodiversity commitments, like the Aichi targets or the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, at serious risk. And fundamentally, it compounds the threat these invasive species pose to national food security and water security. It's a major systemic challenge.
A challenge hidden in plain sight, it seems. Okay, finally, we come to one of the most surprising and frankly quite worrying findings from today's sources.
Yes, this one is quite striking. #HM. Declining sunshine hours across India. Headline 12.
India is apparently experiencing a steady and quite significant decline in the number of sunshine hours received across most parts of the country. Less sun.
That's what their research indicates, yes. This is based on a comprehensive long-term study conducted by the highly respected Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, IITM, based in Pune. They analyzed meteorological data spanning 4 decades, from 1980 right up to 2020.
4 decades of data, and what was the key finding?
The key finding is quite sobering. They found that the number of hours of bright sunshine reaching the ground has declined substantially by about 5 to 20% across most regions of India during that period.
5 to 20% reduction. That seems huge. Are some areas affected more than others?
Yes, the decline was particularly pronounced in certain regions. Specifically, the densely populated, agriculturally crucial Indo-Gangetic Plain saw some of the largest reductions.
Yeah.
And also the northeastern states.
Okay, the crucial question. What is causing this? Why is there less sunshine reaching the ground?
The study attributes the decline to 2 primary factors. Firstly, an increase in overall cloud cover in some regions. But secondly, and perhaps more significantly across the board, rising concentrations of aerosols in the atmosphere.
Aerosols, you mean pollution?
Essentially, yes. Tiny airborne particles originating largely from pollution sources, industrial emissions, vehicle exhaust, smoke from crop burning, and other biomass burning. These aerosols contribute to a phenomenon known as global dimming.
Global dimming. Explain that.
Global dimming is basically where these increased aerosol particles in the atmosphere scatter and reflect incoming solar radiation back into space before it reaches the Earth's surface. So even if the sun is technically out, less of its energy actually makes it down to the ground level. It's like a very thin, persistent haze layer cutting down the sunlight.
Okay, so less sunlight is reaching the surface. What are the implications of this finding? They sound like they could be quite broad.
Profound and interconnected, yes. The study highlights impacts across at least 3 major sectors.
Yeah.
First, agriculture. Reduced solar radiation directly impacts agricultural productivity, especially for sun-loving staple crops like rice and wheat, which are vital for India's food security. Less sun can mean lower yields.
Makes sense.
Second, it poses a massive challenge for India's very ambitious national targets for solar energy generation. If there's fundamentally less sunlight hitting the solar panels, their efficiency drops, and the economic return on investment for building large solar farms is reduced. It complicates the renewable energy transition.
Right. A direct hit to solar power potential. And third,
there are potential impacts on human health. Less direct sunlight exposure can reduce the natural synthesis of vitamin D in the population, which is essential for bone health and immune function. This could have broader public health consequences, especially in a country where vitamin D deficiencies is already a known issue.
Wow, so this isn't just an interesting meteorological finding, it's a critical wake-up call.
Absolutely, a scientific wake-up call.
Okay.
It demands that the impacts of air pollution and these atmospheric dimming trends be fully integrated into national planning around climate change adaptation, agricultural policy, and, crucially, long-term energy strategy. You can't plan for a solar future without accurately accounting for the available sunshine.
A really complex interplay between pollution, climate, energy, agriculture, and health.
Exactly. All interconnected. Hashtag diplomacy. Outro.
Okay, what a truly dense and diverse deep dive that was today. Just to quickly try and summarize the vast landscape we've covered, we started with that high-stakes diplomacy, didn't we? U.S. lawmakers ringing the alarm, urging a repair of strained ties with India. At the same time, these new, somewhat politically charged appointments landing for the ambassador and assistant secretary roles, all happening amidst that ongoing friction over trade tariffs and Russian energy imports.
Then we saw India really powerfully asserting its strategic autonomy, doubling down on those discounted Russian oil imports, almost acting as an economic intermediary for refined products.
While simultaneously pushing forward with strengthening defense ties, especially with Australia as part of the Quad.
Exactly. And navigating that complex geopolitics around critical minerals, particularly with that direct request from a nervous China about rare earths. And even handling that very delicate, symbolic protocol dilemma involving the Taliban flag ahead of the foreign minister's visit.
And then domestically, a real mix. A clear push in some areas for systemic, potentially life-saving reforms, like the aviation regulator seeking funding autonomy to boost safety, or the crackdown, hopefully effective, on toxic drug contamination in the pharmaceutical sector.
Underpinned by that symbolic but important endorsement of indigenous tech, with the Home Minister's switch to Zoho Mail, boosting that self-reliant India narrative.
It feels like the dominant theme running through almost all of these headlines is this constant act of strategic balancing, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You see India being globally assertive, very clearly protecting its core economic and security interests, shielding its energy imports, looking to develop its own rare earth resources, but at the same time, trying very hard to maintain and even strengthen those crucial partnerships with democratic allies, which are seen as necessary for its long-term rise.
And all of this is unfolding against a really challenging domestic backdrop. We saw glimpses of intense political debates, persistent regulatory failures, and these surprising systemic environmental challenges like the invasive species crisis, exacerbated by data gaps, and even the very air pollution causing the sun itself to dim across the country.
It paints a picture of a nation managing immense complexity, both externally and internally.
It really does. Which brings us to a final thought, maybe something for you, our listeners, to ponder. Given this clear, demonstrated push by India for strategic autonomy, especially in vital areas like energy and technology.
The Russian oil, the Zoho example.
Exactly. And considering the simultaneous bipartisan pressure we saw coming from the U.S. Congress to stabilize the relationship and align policies more closely, how exactly will India manage to sustain its necessary economic independence while also navigating the, frankly, increasingly demanding expectations of its Western democratic partners in the year ahead?
That tension, right, between autonomy and alliance.
That's the fundamental question, isn't it? How do you balance pursuing your own path with meeting the expectations of crucial allies? That dynamic seems central to understanding India's trajectory moving forward. What will you be looking for next as you follow the developments?
An excellent strategic question indeed. Something to keep a close eye on.
Well, thank you for engaging with us on this deep dive into today's headlines. We hope it provided some valuable context and insight. We'll see you next time.